Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Just wanted to put out a quick video because of the interesting market action that we're seeing this morning. All of the major stock market indexes have begun selling off after the open. And yesterday we saw a similar phenomenon where everything was selling off, but of course by the end of the day, somebody had come in and bought up the dip and had driven all of the indexes back into the green. I don't know if we're going to see that same kind of action today. We will just have to wait and see. But it is interesting that we're seeing this increased volatility in stocks, and we're seeing all of the major stock market indexes, the NASDAQ leading the pack. The overpriced tech stocks seem to be faring the worst, but we're seeing them all drop. And this is all just on the Fed having talked about raising interest rates. Of course, they haven't actually done anything to raise interest rates yet. But I think that the sell-off that we're seeing, it's kind of indicative of how dependent these assets have become on the Fed's easy monetary policy, and how the bull market that we've seen over the past decade, really, not because of any fundamental economic factors, but really just because of the amount of easy money that has been created by the Fed with their low interest rates that they've been maintaining for over a decade now. Just the mere hint of them mentioning that they might work to raise rates slightly. They're not talking about doing anything drastic, a few points over the next couple of years. And stocks are already selling off. Now, we got the FOMC meeting coming up tomorrow, so it's going to be really interesting to see what Jerome Powell has to say at that meeting, because, I've heard some folks speculating that Powell may already have to pivot and kind of back off of the hawkishness with the interest rate talk, talking about raising the rates. And he may have to do a little bit of damage control here. I'm sure he doesn't want to tank markets. Nobody wants that, but that may be the effect of raising interest rates. As far as gold and silver go, you can see they're just kind of hanging out, not really doing much today. They both were in the green earlier. Silver slightly in the red now, down about 5 cents. Gold up about $5, so they're not really selling off. It's more of a consolidation. I mean, silver has given up a little bit of the gains that it had over the past weeks, but still hanging strong there in that high 23 level. And then gold, pretty strong over 1800. They don't seem to be as affected by news of rising rates. I think it's important to note that in the past, interest rates being moved upward to control inflation has not been bad for gold and silver. The reason I say that is I want to draw your attention over here to some data provided by the Minneapolis Fed. And this is historical data on the CPI dating back to 1913. And there's a few years I really want to draw your attention to. That is 1978, 1979, and 1980. And 1980 is of particular note for folks who are interested in gold and silver, because that is the year that gold and silver hit their all-time high. Up until that point, silver, I believe, hit $50 in intraday trading, never closed that high. It did touch that in intraday trading. I think the highest close was about $42. And gold went up to $8.50, which was an all-time high. Of course, in 1971, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, gold was $35 an ounce. And by 1980, it got as high as $8.50. And it's also of note because that is the year that the CPI topped out at 13.5. Now, I know I've talked in previous videos about how, the CPI was calculated differently then, and it's designed to understate inflation. So the CPIs we have now, it's not an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at this, but for the sake of this video, we're just going to use the Fed's official numbers for comparison purposes. And, last year in 2021, we had a CPI of 7%. Well, in 1978, that is about what we were looking at, with a 7.6% year-over-year CPI for that year. So if you want to really compare 2021 to a year, 1978 is probably your best comparison, or 1977 when the rate was 6.5%. But we're going to look at 1978. Now, let's look at silver prices for 1978, because ST Bullion has this nice chart where we can go back and look at the historical data for daily silver prices from the year 1978, and you can see silver was actually still pretty cheap back in 1978. It started the year off around the $5 level and finished the year up around $6.20. So a decent move up, nothing too drastic compared to what it would see in the coming years. And then if we go to the 1979 chart, we can see that it's actually just after August that we start to see the big move up. I mean, the beginning of the year was a good time for silver, went from $6 or $7 there to about 9 or 10 here in August. But then in August and September, really start to see a drastic move up in the price of silver, finishing the year around the $25 level. And then that was setting us up for the all-time high that was hit in the beginning of 1980. And 1980, of course, was the year that inflation peaked, and it was also the year that gold and silver hit their all-time highs. Now, another interesting thing about this number, the $50, or you want to say 42 was the highest close for silver. If you adjust that for all of the inflation that has occurred since 1980, you're talking about somewhere in the range of $140 to $170 in today's dollars. Significantly higher than where we're at right now. Something very important happened in 1979 that kicked off this move up in the price of silver, and that was that Paul Volcker became the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. You can see that was in August 6th of 1979. And as soon as he got into the Fed and he became the chairman, he began raising interest rates drastically to get inflation under control. And one of the effects that had, I mean, it wasn't just higher interest rates that drove the price of silver up, but you can see that they did correlate pretty nicely. I mean, Paul Volcker gets in August, he raises rates, and silver begins to take off. Was that the cause of silver's rise? It was certainly part of it. I mean, it played a role, and you can see, I mean, they're correlated pretty significantly there. You get Paul Volcker in, and then boom, silver's off to the races. Now, silver did, when it peaked, it crashed. A lot of that had to do with rules being changed on the exchanges where people could trade silver. It was sort of an orchestrated hit on silver. They forced people who had leveraged long positions to liquidate their positions. Basically, they margin called anybody who was long on silver, and that caused this drastic drop. But still, nonetheless, if you were a smart trader and you got out at the right time, silver was a very profitable trade in the late 70s and beginning of 1980. Another factor in this run up, which is of interest today because there is some correlation to what we're looking at right now, the beginning of 1980 and the end of 1979 is when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So it wasn't just higher rates and high inflation, it was also a Russian invasion that triggered the big move up in silver. I know history doesn't repeat, but they do say that history sometimes rhymes, and I think that this is an example of that. If we're going to put ourselves in a place historically, we would fit the bill for 1978. You've got a CPI around 7%. Interest rates haven't been raised yet. I know they were higher then than they are now, but in a relative sense, they hadn't seen a big raise in interest rates at this point. Silver's cheap, and then you go to 1979, and what do you get? You get higher interest rates, and you get a Russian invasion, and you get rising inflation. And, there's quite a bit of correlation to what we're looking at today. Today we have cheap silver. Today we have rising inflation. The CPI just came in at 7% year over year for 2021. So that would put you right in line with 1978, and that would make 2022 1979. And you can see that 1979 is the year that silver really began to take off, because 2022, we've got rising inflation, we've got the Fed talking about raising interest rates. Russia's looking to invade Ukraine. So it's kind of interesting the similarities between our situation today and the situation in 1979, where you saw the biggest bull run in silver's history kick off. So, are we going to see an exact repeat of history? I'd say that's doubtful, but it is interesting to note that in the past, when interest rates were raised in a big way, which is what Paul Volcker did, he cranked interest rates up to just about 20%. And that actually triggered a massive run up in the price of gold and silver. So don't think that rising rates is going to be bad for gold and silver necessarily. That has not been the case historically. It may be something that pricks these bubbles that we've seen. As we can see, stocks are selling off on the speculation that interest rates are going to move up, and only in a little way. So if we do see interest rates get moved up in a big way, I would say it's going to start looking pretty grim for stocks and maybe looking real good for gold and silver. We'll see what the Fed does tomorrow. We got the FOMC, so we're going to hear from them shortly. It's going to be a very important FOMC, obviously. There's some speculation that Powell may do some kind of a pivot. He may come out and try and do damage control on the markets. We'll have to see. Maybe he'll back off on raising interest rates a little bit, or he might proceed with it. I can't really predict what Powell will do. It would not shock me if his tone was a little bit more conciliatory for markets and he seemed a little bit less concerned about inflation, given that I don't think he wants to be the one at the helm when we see a massive stock market crash. But you never know. If he comes out and he doesn't raise rates, or he gets a little bit more dovish in his tone, that could be good for gold and silver too, because I think that that's going to be a sign to investors that inflation is here to stay. And the Fed really is in between a rock and a hard place. If they raise rates, they could crash markets. If they don't raise rates, we could see inflation spiral out of control. Raising rates when the U.S. national debt is $30 trillion is kind of tough. It's going to be hard to service the debt if we have much higher rates. So I don't think they're going to really have the option of raising rates significantly enough to get ahead of inflation. But based on what's going on with gold and silver and how cheap especially silver is right now, I mean, silver is really cheap, guys. $23.75. Again, if you inflation adjust the old 1980 high of $50, you get a number around $170. So, is silver going to move that high? Probably not this year. Although I would say anything is possible when you have the amount of leverage in the system that we have, and you have such geopolitical instability. You never know. If Ukraine gets invaded by Russia, I would say that'll probably drive the price of gold and silver higher. I would expect people would be looking for safe havens in that event. That probably also would be pretty bad for stocks. So we'll find out tomorrow. We won't have to wait long. It's a 2-day meeting, so we'll hear a little bit from Powell tomorrow, and then we'll hear more on Thursday, and then all will be revealed. And it certainly will be interesting to see how markets react. But I just want to point out that if interest rates do get raised, that's not necessarily going to be a bad thing for gold and silver. So if you guys like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. That does help with the algorithm. I appreciate all of you watching very much. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click that subscribe button too. Click that bell notification icon. That way YouTube will let you know when I put out more videos like this one. There will also be some videos popping up on your screen now that you can check out if you enjoyed this one. And thank you guys very much for watching. I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.